We have this little interesting presentation here about the Trimet budget, and they're doing it online, I guess, because they're all staying at home, as we know, while you're out there grinding the wheel. The elites are at home, which I can personally consider disrespectful, even though I'm not a part of their little club anymore. I mean, if what's good for the employees should be good for the executives, but that's all not the way it is anymore. So this is an internal. They're talking about how to submit your budget request. So let's just give this a real quick look.
Well as the pieces that the financial services or accounting team needs, charging invoices and stuff. Keep your eye out for that offering. One of the changes that we initiated last year.
Now, remember, I brought this up in other presentations, is that Trimet budget this year is actually higher than last year, even though they've cut services by 20%. Their actual budget, their total budget, is higher, in the supreme irony of the Great Reset. But that's all part of the Great Reset. You take away from the bottom class and you give it to the upper class. And you can see that actually play out at Trimet in this thing here, because the budget's the same for most everything at Trimet, but they don't have the same service. So why has that been allowed to happen? Well, they'll say that it's a labor shortage. Well, I don't believe them. I think it was a calculated plan. I think all of this was calculated. I don't think any of this is some kind of accident like, oh, we didn't expect this labor shortage to happen. It was all out of the blue. Now look. I don't believe that. Sorry.
Was the addition of the operating impact section of the project proposal. It was underutilized, and we're putting some additional attention on that this year. When I get into the proposal form, I will call attention to that section. It really, not all projects have to worry about that. It's really our big projects that will have ongoing operating impacts. If you think about things like, for instance, Division Transit Project, where we're adding new assets and new service, and so there will be this tail of additional operating expenses related to the project. We're looking to make sure that that is detailed on the project proposal form.
Yeah, you see, they've got unlimited money for these capital projects. You've got to understand this. It's unlimited, apparently, because I just keep seeing them adding money here and there and everywhere. And anytime they need more money, they have it. It's like unlimited. That's what my perception is.
So I'll point out where that is on the proposal form. And if you happen to be associated with one of those big projects and that isn't filled out, you'll probably have me coming back to you and reminding you, hey, we need this data as well. There are a couple of changes that have happened to the proposal management process. One, which actually kicked off last year, and we did a little bit of a process to get that moving. The working wage agreement, so we initiated a touch base with all proposals with our LRHR team to review the project relative to our working wage agreement, ensure that we are considering all of our union considerations and obligations we have due to the working wage agreement. I'll call attention to that again when we get into the proposal form itself, kind of point out the different pieces associated with that. However, there is a new process, brand new, that people are seeing for the first time as they're kicking off this work, which is we did make a fairly significant adjustment to how you're managing the business plan alignment. And again, I will show that as well. Pretty excited to get that going. In my opinion, it doesn't add a significant amount of additional work for those people who are actually managing projects, but gives us a lot of great additional detail. So, any questions on any of that before I move forward? Going once, going twice. Okay. I'm going to step out of my lovely deck, and I'm going to head over to Trimet. So wanted to show and share some of the tools that we have on Trimet.
Here we go with this again. America's recovery. You see, they destroyed it so they could rebuild it. It was all an intentional act, everybody. Get this through your head. Nothing that has happened was by accident. Understand that one concept because it's important to understand.
First off, where you go. So my team is in Finance and Administrative Services. You come divisions, Finance and Administrative Services. We are the Budgets and Grants team. And we have this lovely Capital Improvement Program section here. This tab, this section of Trinet, I have worked hard over the last several years to make this be the one-stop shopping for all things CIP. And so you can see up at the top, we have a series of documents that we use to manage annual CIP processes, the most relevant being our current year. We do have some historical data here as well. I'm going to go ahead and open up the master list of projects. Kind of want to show this document has had some significant revisions over the years.
I think I've seen a copy of this actually in hard format. There's like 100 or 200 or 300 or 400 different projects that are going on here. These are all separate capital projects going on at the agency. They're all separate.
Essentially, the main tab, this fiscal year 2022 CIP, has a summary of all the projects. It tells which division it's in. If it happens to be managed by a different division, that's the PM division, who the PM is. One of the things you'll notice on any document I create, I love to use groupings. That's these little squares with the pluses at the top. Additional data that you can have access to, so a whole series of labels that we use, not as pertinent necessarily, but good information. A lot of people like to understand where they're at. So you can open that grouping to see the label.
You can see the scope of their capital projects division. As I've said 1,000 times, Trimet is a property development agency, aka a capital projects agency. And you can see the scope of this just from this right here. You can see the intensity and the amount of money and effort and people that are put into this. And meanwhile, the service on the ground is, bad, which means it's a failed agency, but the agency isn't accountable to you or me or anybody. It's accountable to the capital projects department, which feeds the oligarchy of the Portland area.
Then what was the adopted budget for the project? And then stepping across the page, you see any adjustments that have happened to the project throughout the course of the year. So we have here our year-end balancing. We do have a process as we close out each budget year where, depending on how a project performed the year before, we may make an adjustment to its current year's budget. If it overspent in the previous year, we adjust the current year's budget, assuming that overspend was a matter of timing, and we need to accommodate that overspend. If there are any actions that the CCC does to modify project budgets, they show up here. So you can see already we're in October, and the CCC has approved an additional $7 million.
Yeah, there you go. See, we have no problem coming up with money for this stuff. It's just, and you see this everywhere in the government. You see, they have no problem coming up with $6 billion to send to Ukraine. They have no problem funding an extra $100 billion for the military. It's just certain things they don't have any money for. And for some unknown reason, people don't care. Their brains have been turned into mush so that they accept this as normal business. But I mean, you can see how bad things really are because they have money out of their ears, but they won't make their jobs driving buses more attractive vis-a-vis making them pay extremely well rather than middle class after 3 years. They won't change that paradigm. They're determined to stay at that paradigm. In other words, they don't give a shit about the service. Their little $2,500 bonus is a pittance. It's nothing. Maybe if you add a $10,000 bonus, somebody might turn their eye, but $2,500, you're only going to appeal to people that have nothing. Okay, people that have nothing will say, "Oh, that's good money."
For different projects to utilize in different ways. And then what is the amended budget? That's basically adopted budget plus all the adjustments. You'll see other tabs opened up. This grouping will slowly be ungrouped throughout the course of the year. After we finish our quarterly review at the end of this month, we'll get some information here about how projects are adjusting their budget, and this column will get populated and flow through. Ccc Action Summary started this a couple years ago, basically giving a summary of exactly what happened in each CCC meeting. So you can come here and see, meeting by meeting, what projects were discussed, if there were impacts to those. This, by the way, only details the projects that either pass through a gate or have some kind of a funding change. If there's some other dialogue about a project that doesn't impact either the gates and phases or project funding, it may not be noted here. The funding detail tab, so this is the working version of this other summary you see. One of the things you'll notice if you poke around at the purple text you see here, these are all formulas that are actually pulling data from the funding detail tab. And that's because this tab is where I do all my management. Basically, when I'm inputting and managing changes, this is where I do my work. The reason why we've separated that out, one of the things you'll see is, there's a lot of essentially the same columns that you see here. But there's a number of additional pieces that we keep here and that we share for transparency if people want to see it. First off, if you scroll down, you'll see we've broken out all the projects by their funding sources. And this is essentially where all the data is actually managed. I plug in whenever there's a change. I make the changes down here by funding source, and that flows up to this data, and then this data flows over to this data. So there's a whole flow through. But if people are interested to say, hey, what is our general fund? Which projects have approved budget for general fund? You can see that here. What was the adopted budget for that funding source? What were the changes by funding source? You can do the same by bond, secured and unsecured, SIF, federal, state, and local. Additionally, one of the other additional pieces of information we have on this tab that aren't on the summary is we have a long-term forecast. When the projects are submitted to us each budget year, many of them will give us an extended forecast. Some of them we require them to do it. Our program projects are required to give us a forecast that goes out 25 years. Any other project, though, that is expected to do work that moves into future years, we ask for that as well. This is information used heavily by our team for our forecast work, which a lot of people pay attention to how we manage our forecast. So this is really important information. Other pieces of information that we share. I'm sorry, let me go back. I mentioned my lovely groupings that I love to do. There are a series of grouped data points up here as well. You can see those same project labels that are on.
You can see that this is like a giant game of Monopoly or something. They have all this money, and so they're handing it out to go do shit, whatever the fuck all this stuff is. I mean, this is the part of Trimet that nobody knows about. I'm going to skip ahead because it's very technical. It's not really getting into specifics as to what they're funding, which is what I want to hear. Is like, what are you funding? Let's hear a list. I can't read this, but I'd like him to go through that list, explain these projects. But that's probably not going to happen in this video. I'm going to start skipping through some of this.
Tab exists here information. We do have a series of other pieces of information that I have here on the appropriately named additional details tab. Miscellaneous info, you can poke around at this if you want, but this is mostly just different labels I use for different things. Again, got a number of the same labels going through, but I've got a few columns here I use for different things I track. In the total projects section, we actually keep a detail of how much did a project say they were going to spend in total year over year. And this way we're able to kind of keep our eye on and see how much does a project spend expectation change or increase over time. This has come up in several CTC discussions, and we determined it would be valuable for us to be able to have that history at our fingertips. The actual history here, this is kind of related to that total, but this is the actual spend, annual spend of each of the projects each year. The next update we get, I did actually update the 2021 spend, but it has the projects.
Skip.
So that's one thing just to be aware of as you're dealing with those account strings. That's kind of a delineator between your operating and your CIP. As you can see here, though, we do have the account segments that start with 105. Those are the capital accounts. We do have a lot of projects, as I mentioned, that do have operating accounts. So anything that starts with a 5, most of them are 504s. These are all operating accounts in here. So many projects do have both capital and operating. Some are capital only, some are operating only. Most of them have some capital component, though. So this is a good source to come to if you want to know, hey, what accounts I'm helping to code an expense for a project. What are the account strings I can use? Proposal forms. So you can see I've got an instruction set here, and then we keep you are responsible. Shauna, I will say I sincerely apologize. I've been trying to this is the first time I've run one of these events. You should be unmuted now. So did you have a question, something you want to bring up? Hopefully everybody's unmuted now. No one? Okay. I'm going to keep going.
Nobody has a question.
Mark, can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes, I can.
Okay. The unmute worked. You answered my question. Thank you.
What was the question?
Okay, perfect. The proposal form. So let me dig into the proposal form itself. So this is the document that you use all the way through the life of a project. So when we get into gates and phases, I'll show you, we have typing in various ways. The green cells are actually drop downs where you're making a choice from, and we still
for projects. The end user, maintainer, and sponsor have not, to my knowledge, quantified the operational cost savings of having a new asset. So do we just list it without quantification, or what advice would you offer?
Great question. I think it's going to be a mix. I think there are going to be some cases, like I think in particular, like a lot of the big FTA projects, they absolutely, especially for the expected ongoing revenue or operating expenses, there's required for some amount of work to be done to lay those out. Expecting state of the LRHR team during Gate 2 and during Gate 4B. And when you're sending it over to LRHR, we want a detailing of each time a contact. Now that that's no longer the case, these are now gray, and there's this little section that says selections made in the business plan grouping on the other information tab. So what we did this year is we adjusted the way this is managed. What you've got over here, you've got some instructions. This used to be just informational, but we've adjusted, hoping that as they actually deleted the row in mid-September, you all are here toward the end of October, so it is what it is. People have been starting with their CIP proposal work already. So as noted here when I was doing this, we were currently holding those kickoff training meetings. People should be currently working on updating their CIP proposals. Whatever timeline is required to ensure the initial submitters are ready and delivered to me by the end of November, and our initial submittal due date is November 24th. This initial submittal is for both new and continuing projects. And I've said it before, you'll hear me say it again, those new projects must have gone through Gate 1 before I accept them. If you send me a new project that has not gone through Gate 1, I will hand it back to you and say, let's work on getting you to CCC so you can in the current year. So each year already, a couple of documents that you use as your
All right, this
helps you do this life today.
This is has very little content for somebody like me. He's instructing managers of these various capital projects divisions on how to submit their budgets via this Excel program, which I don't know anything. I'm not very good with Excel. I know how to use it basically, but this is very complicated.
Section when you operate it, then we call it a gates and phase project. The program projects are those that we expect to have some amount of ongoing expense year in and year out. And so some of the examples we give are bus purchases, our program projects. We buy some amount of buses every single year. We have in our facilities team, they have a series of projects called facilities components replacement. It's them managing and dealing with things that break and that aren't planned for. And those essentially some amount of expenditure that happens every remember that projects should not have significant time spent on development and cannot be submitted for inclusion in the budget discussion until they pass through gate 1. So one of the things you'll see, I'll get into this a little bit more when I pull up the summary of the gates and phases. Phase 0, gate 0, phase 1.
All right, moving on.
There is no business unit that provides PD services, PD project management services
after. And bring that up when they're talking, doing their gate 1 presentation.
This is not right.
Gate 5 and 6 can be consent agenda topics if there's no change in scope, schedule, and budget. And in many instances, gate 5 and 6 are actually managed at the same time. So that's not a problem. And what this means is that the consent agenda is at the beginning of the meeting, does not have a detailed discussion. We do still ask that the project managers be present just to be completed. It was to move through gates, to wait until 6. Really was project development was the wild, wild west. Anybody could raise their hand and start asking for people. And sometimes we had people spending significant amounts of time on developing projects and financial estimates for projects that CPC had no way having been engaged in, and we did not really have any interest in actually pursuing as an agency. And so having this process where, in phase 0, gate 0 funding, a project all have resources we're safe. Let me see if I can find on my proposal form. This doesn't want to let us, we are continue to be.
Yeah. Can you please be quiet over there?
I just blow my nose.
You're coughing, blowing your nose. This has very little information. This is all targeted to these managers, middle managers that are submitting these budget proposals for these hundreds and hundreds of capital projects. They have to go through a specific process, and he's laying it out here.
And committed to January with the final forecast update expected to be at the end of March. Expected to be at the end of March as well.
Yeah. That was okay, but it was just, it doesn't give us any information for the public that's useful. This is just information for the internal people that are completing requests for budgets using that particular template that he's explaining there, which I have no idea what it is because I'm not familiar with that Excel program to that extent. So for us, it doesn't really mean anything. It's just a technical internal video.